Think not that I come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. Welcome to the channel Think Again. Sets apart people, always desiring truth. Praise the Lord always. Blessings to the Most High. When was Christmas invented? We can Google this. According to Britannica, it followed Saturnalia, a festival where people feasted and exchanged gifts. The church in Rome began celebrating Christmas on December 25th in the 4th century, during the reign of Constantine, the first Christian emperor, possibly to weaken the pagan traditions. How did December 25 become Christmas? The early evidence shows that it wasn't until the late 2nd century until people started trying to figure out the date Jesus was born. By 336 AD, the Emperor Constantine established December 25th as the date when Christians celebrated Christ's birth. Prior to this, there was Gaia and there was Mithra, who were also seen to be messiahs, and their birthday was also the 25th of December. Until the year 300, there was no even talk of a birth of the Messiah. So for 300 years, there was no birth of any Christian Messiah. And notice that the people of the time do not celebrate birthdays. Neither do Muslims, neither do Jews celebrate birthdays. So for a person to insert a birthday, it has to come from pagan tradition. See this following video from Jim Staley, who has done an excellent job on explaining December 25.
5th. And although the Roman Church today has done a great job of convincing a lot of people that December 25th was never a pagan holiday, much less the birthday of a pagan sun god, history and their own bishops tell a completely different story. Epiphanius not only tells us that the Greeks celebrated the birthday of their god on December 25th, but within a few lines of that quote, he goes on to say that virtually every other pagan culture of his time period had a celebration on December 25th. He says this, and I quote, "Greeks, I mean the idolaters, celebrate this day, the winter solstice, on the 8th before the calends of January," which is another way of saying 8 days before the 1st of January, or December 25th. The Romans call it Saturnalia, Egyptians Chronia, Alexandrians Sicilia. The winter solstice was not only the birthday, my friends, of the Egyptian and Greek gods, but Epiphanius tells us it was celebrated by the largest cultures of his time. And he lived in the 300s. And speaking of the 300s, let's take a look at the next exhibit, which is none other than the Roman calendar from 354 AD, that literally states that December 25th was the birthday of the Roman sun god. This calendar was created by a calligrapher named Philocalus for a wealthy Christian named Valentinus. In part 6 of this calendar, it actually has December 25th listed as a pagan Roman holiday. Here's the exact entry. It says, quote, "Birthday of the unconquered, games ordered, 30 races." Now this is the oldest literary reference to the pagan feast of Sol Invictus, the sun god of Rome, that we have. Did you hear what it said? December 25th is marked on the only surviving Roman calendar that we have from that time period, and it says that it's the birthday of a Roman sun god. Now we know that the Roman Christians were celebrating December 25th as the birthday of Christ at this time because ironically, on this very same calendar of 354, December 25th is also mentioned as the birthday of Christ. And we know that they didn't celebrate it in the 3rd century on December 25th because Dr. Stephen Hidgmans tells us that in the De Pascha Computus, which was written in 243 AD to determine the date of Easter, they argued that Christ, the new Son of Righteousness, must have been born on March 28th. This tells us that in the mid-3rd century, the date of Christmas was not yet known, and its date would be chosen sometime after this and before 354 calendar, most likely during the reign of Emperor Constantine of the 330s. But do we have any more evidence of sun worship in Rome before 354? We most certainly do. Not only do we have Emperor Aurelian dedicating a temple to the sun god Sol Invictus in 274 AD, archaeology has uncovered the sun god Sol Invictus minted on Roman coins in the 4th century, 3rd century, 2nd century, 1st century, and even as far back as the 1st century BC. Out of every god available in the pantheon, in every century that Rome existed, the emperor chose to have Sol Invictus as the head of every Roman coin. It is also a well-documented fact that the Emperor Constantine, before his alleged conversion to Christianity, was a dedicated sun god worshiper, proving that sun worship was alive and well in Rome. And what day do you think they celebrated the birthday of the sun and all of these sun gods? On the only day of the year that they believed the sun was reborn, the winter solstice, December 25th. Emperor Julian confirms when the Romans worshiped their sun god. He says this in 361 AD. Quote, before the beginning of the year, at the end of the month, which we call after Chronos, our December, we celebrate in honor of Helios, the Greek sun god, the most splendid games, and we dedicate the festival to the invincible sun. My friends, it cannot get any more clear than this. Even the Roman emperor states that at the end of December, they had a major celebration to the sun god, and we know the day in question was December 25th because it was actually on the calendar in 354 that tells us this. And we've already displayed that. The Catholic Encyclopedia says this about Helios. Helios Mithras is one god, and Sunday was kept holy in honor of Mithra. The 25th of December was observed as his birthday, the Natalius Invicti, the rebirth of the winter sun, unconquered by the rigors of the season. You can see that even the Catholic scholars admit that Greek sun god Helios and the Roman sun god Mithras became one god, and his birthday was December 25th, and Sunday was his day. Which, by the way, is exactly why today most of Christianity has church and celebrates the Sabbath on Sunday. It's not...
Genesis 1:27, King James Version. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. Notice that God created man in his own image. This means that man was perfectly born in the character of God, knowing what is good. In the image of God. So man is created perfectly in the image of God. Genesis 2:3. And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it. Sanctified means to make holy, because that in it he had rested from all his work which God created and made. So notice, God himself rests on the seventh day because he abstained from the work of creation. Hebrews 4:6. Seeing therefore it remains that some must enter therein, and they to whom it was first preached entered not in because of unbelief. So he says clearly, they didn't enter because they had unbelief. They didn't understand who this God is and what was his requirements. They lacked belief in what the Most High had said concerning the seventh day. Hebrews 4 is clearly only about the seventh day if you take the time to read it slowly. Hebrews 4:10. For the man who comes into his rest has had rest from his works. Now notice, if you go to Genesis 2:3, God rested from all his work of creation. Hebrews 4:10 says that the man who comes into that rest must also rest from all his works, like how God did, as God did from his work. So this is a physical rest, because God can create, man can also create. He goes to work, he builds cupboards, he has a job where he is in the process of creation. So man must also abstain from his own work, physical work, as God rested from his own physical work. Genesis 2:3. And if we read the commandments on Sabbath keeping, it clearly says, and you shall do no work. Hebrews 4:9 says, so that there is still a Sabbath keeping for the people of God. Is still means that it continues. The Sabbath was the seventh day in the Jewish custom. Notice it says, so that there is still a Sabbath keeping for the people of God. Notice Hebrews as New Testaments. This is way after the Messiah has risen to heaven. Notice that God has not changed his law. It clearly says, so there still is. Still is means it continues to remain. So if the Sabbath was the seventh day, it still continues to remain the seventh day. It has not changed. Hebrews 4 says Jesus has not given another day. The church says because he rose on the first day of the week, he now gave a new day. It's not biblical. Hebrews 4:24 reads, and put on the new man, to which God has given life, in righteousness and a true and holy way of living. The writer of Hebrews clearly nails it, that God has given life, because don't forget, on the sixth day God had given Adam and Eve life. Notice that God's requirements was righteousness, and if I do all these commandments, it would be accounted to me as righteousness. And a true, thy law is the truth. A holy way, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and earth. Notice that God created for 6 days. There was evening and morning, evening and morning. But the seventh day is no evening and morning because God was resting on the seventh day. There is still 7 days according to evening and morning. The reason he does not mention the evening and morning because God is resting, and us too will keep the seventh day according to evening and morning. We are physically resting as it is commanded in the scriptures. You shall do no work in it, remembering the Creator who created everything. If a man chooses another day, Sunday, he then has a new Creator. But if you keep the Sabbath, Saturday, the seventh day, you are remembering the God who created all things, Yahweh. He created all things. And so if you have a Jesus that now gives you a new Sabbath, I don't think that's the same Jesus of the Bible, who clearly says he did not speak of another day. But instead, there still is a Sabbath keeping for the people of God. That would mean the seventh day remains, because seventh day Sabbath has to do with the creation of Yahweh and not sun god worship as the pagans believe. And so if you have followed the route of Sunday deception, then you are affiliated to the ecclesiastical power of the Roman church beast system. Therefore, you keep all the feasts that they have instituted, Easter and Christmas, for example, whereas the set-apart seventh-day Sabbath-keeping believer does not believe in Christmas and Easter. Instead, he believes in the Passover and the commandments that follow. The 10 commandments, not the 9 commandments, but the 10 commandments.
It's not because Jesus rose from the dead on Sunday. It's because the Romans chose to officially change the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday in 321 AD under Emperor Constantine, because that's the day the pagans had their Sabbath, and it was easier to get the pagans to convert to Christianity if they were allowed to keep their pagan traditions. The church's position was to let people still celebrate it, but now we're going to do it for Jesus. That kind of compromise and the changing of the laws and the times is how the church has operated from the very beginning. That's exactly how they chose December 25th. They tried to conquer a pagan day and redeem it, forgetting that God has never been interested in redeeming pagan days of worship. He already has His own special days that He wants His people to worship Him on. He has only been interested in redeeming people from pagan worship. Can you imagine the Israelites trying to take a pagan altar and use it to worship the God of Israel when they were specifically forbidden to do so in Deuteronomy chapter 12? By the way, if the subject of the Sabbath interests you and you'd like to find out how it too was changed, I encourage you to click the link at the top of this video or click the link in the description for more information. Now you might be thinking to yourself, isn't the winter solstice on December 21st? If you're talking about today's corrected Gregorian calendar, you'd be correct. But the current calendar has only been in effect since 1582 to replace the Julian calendar that was created in 46 BC that was off by 11 minutes each year. So in the original Julian calendar, the winter solstice was on December 25th, and it continued to be celebrated on that day out of tradition, even though the solstice began to shift to different days due to the Julian calendar not being perfectly accurate. We know that December 25th was originally on the winter solstice because Roman historian Pliny the Elder in 63 AD tells us exactly that. He says, quote, "The Bruma, which is the winter solstice, begins on the 8th degree of Capricorn, the 8th day before the calends of January," which again is another way of saying 8 days before the 1st of January, which is December 25th. That comes directly from an historian in the 1st century. And speaking of cultures that worship sun gods on the winter solstice, as I mentioned earlier, it's not just the ancient Egyptian and Roman cultures of the early centuries that venerated the sun on this day. We see the same pattern all over the world and throughout all time. The Aztecs, for example, of Mexico, not only did they have many of their temples built with the winter solstice in mind, but according to Aztec theology, their god, Huitzilopochtli, was also said to be born on the winter solstice. And if we head back across the Pacific Ocean to Japan, we find another sun god story that takes place on the very same winter solstice. According to Japanese Shintoism legend, the sun goddess Amaterasu is coaxed out of a cave on the winter solstice by the god of happiness after fleeing from her brother who's in a state of rage. When the sun goddess comes out on the winter solstice, she's said to be, quote, reborn. The sun comes alive again. In Shintoism, their followers still celebrate this ancient ceremony called Toji Tosai by lighting candles and worshiping the sun goddess every year on this day. And I'm certainly not saying that the Aztecs of the 13th century or Japanese Shintoism or any quote that I've mentioned after the 4th century has any influence on the decision in the 4th century to make Christ's birthday on December 25th. What I am displaying, though, is a pattern of sun god worship that happens to be on the winter solstice that's found on every continent for the last 5,000 years. And since we know that the Aztecs had no clue that the Romans ever existed, either they migrated originally from the Middle East thousands of years earlier and brought sun god worship on the winter solstice with them, or they learned it directly from demons. Possibly the same demons that they summoned during their human sacrifices. Either way, it seems that one of the most important days of worship for Satan was on December 25th. Even modern-day Wiccans celebrate the birthday of their god on the winter solstice, celebrating it at none other than the ancient Stonehenge that we mentioned earlier. They call it, of all things, Yule Day, which is the same ancient name that Germanic and Scandinavian peoples gave it thousands of years earlier. And interestingly enough, the ancient Vikings refer to Yule Day as Odin's Day. Did you catch that? Out of every single day of the year that they could have ever chosen to be Odin's Day, which is most scholars say is the precursor for the development of some of the attributes of Santa Claus, they chose December 25th, the winter solstice, as his day. Although I could continue to list other pagan deities that were worshipped on this day, we will leave this section with one final piece of evidence. And this evidence comes from none other than the Church of Satan themselves. Although the following quote is not an ancient academic piece of evidence, it is definitely eye-opening to say the least. Here's what they say on their own website about December 25th, and I quote, "The Christians stole this holiday from the pagans. The Nazarene or Christian has little place in the general public celebration of this season, which were meant by pagans to be celebrations of abundance during the season of cold and emptiness. So for the Yule holiday season, we enjoy the richness of life and the company of people whom we cherish, as we will often be the only ones who know where the traditions really came from." I don't know about you, but we are not even halfway through this trial, and December 25th is not looking so innocent as we were led to believe. When the Church of Satan is claiming that 1, their master invented this day for the worship of himself, and 2, that each individual is supposed to indulge in self-gratification, which is exactly what happens most of the time during Christmas holidays, and 3, it's backed up by countless cultures throughout time being influenced by Satan to worship sun gods on this day, it appears to me that the ancient winter solstice was in fact a major pagan day of worship to Satan himself.
It's really amazing how a person can celebrate someone else's birthday. They don't even know the day that the person was born on. They never sat or met with the person, yet they choose to celebrate the birth of a person that they have not had supper with or sat with. Now, how can I celebrate someone's birthday? I exchange gifts between people, but I'm actually in self-indulgence. I'm giving myself a gift. I'm giving my children a gift. I can't give Jesus a gift now, can I? So, the whole idea to celebrate Christmas is self-indulgence, to give yourself a second birthday. I remind you that early believers before this time of Christmas did not celebrate birthdays. Neither Muslims, neither the Jews. None did. The only ones that celebrated birthdays were pagans. We see this in the New Testament. John's head on a plate. Notice it was a birthday celebration. No believers ever in the history of the Bible celebrated their birthday. Neither is there evidence in the encyclopedias that Abrahamic religions kept their birthdays. So all it is, when you keep Christmas, you want to give yourself a second birthday and blame it on the Holy Messiah. Be set apart. The set apart believer is set apart in righteousness. Righteousness is defined in the Bible. If I do all these commandments, it will be accounted to me for righteousness. And righteousness is also in the Messiah because he kept God's commandments perfectly. Jesus was a man to lead us back to the Father. And if we follow him, we will know the way that we should go, walking in righteousness as he walked, so that we too can become sons and daughters of the Most High. May the mighty God Yahweh our Father bless us, and thanking Him for the Lord Jesus Christ, who has come to show us the way we should go. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Hallelujah. God bless you. Enjoy your life by walking in righteousness. Baruch Hashem.